Hello and welcome to your Newsmax Daily for Wednesday, April 16th, 2025, the 106th day of the year, the second to last day of Lent for Christians around the world, with tomorrow being Holy Thursday, and it's the fifth day of Passover for Jews around the world. And on the calendar of made-up holidays, it's National Librarian Day. If that is you, kudos to you, and thank you for what you do. On the food calendar, it's National Banana Day, one of God's greatest gifts. And on this day in 1995, then Texas Governor George W. Bush declared April 16th as Selena Day in Texas, marking the birthday of the late, great Tejano singer, which is now recognized and celebrated worldwide. And we have tragic news right out of the gate this morning. The Pentagon confirming 2 U.S. service members were killed and another was injured Tuesday when their vehicle rolled over along the southern border in New Mexico. Thousands of U.S. troops, as you know, are now patrolling the U.S.-Mexico border, which has helped decrease the number of border crossings by more than 90%, as President Trump and the El Salvadorian president discussed in Monday's meeting. This is White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt in the White House press briefing.
On the border, President Trump continues to break records and protect our homeland. According to CBP, Border Patrol apprehensions along the southwest border for the entire month of March 2025 were lower than the first 2 days of March 2024 under Joe Biden. Incredible law enforcement officers are arresting violent illegal aliens from American communities every day. Here are a few examples from the latest ICE report, which I received this morning. ICE Los Angeles arrested a 54-year-old citizen of Mexico convicted of rape by threat, sodomy with a person under 14 years, and kidnapping in San Jose, California. ICE Houston has arrested a 23-year-old citizen of Mexico convicted of predatory criminal sexual assault of a child in Cook County, Illinois. ICE Houston arrested a 64-year-old citizen of Honduras convicted of murder in Los Angeles County, California. ICE Chicago arrested a 49-year-old citizen of Guatemala convicted of assault and arson in Prince Williams, Virginia, not far from here. ICE Denver arrested a 36-year-old citizen of Mexico who is registered as a sex offender and has been convicted of sexual assault of a child in Lake County, Colorado. ICE Baltimore arrested a 50-year-old citizen of China convicted of sex trafficking in Bel Air, Maryland. And ICE Boston arrested a 46-year-old citizen of Jamaica convicted of 3 counts of rape of a child and 2 counts of indecent assault and battery of a child under 14 in Boston, Massachusetts. President Trump and our administration will not rest until every single violent illegal alien is removed from our country. The safety of the American people is too important to settle for anything less. On that note, the Democrat and media outrage over the deportation of Abrego Garcia, an MS-13 El Salvadorian illegal alien criminal who is hiding in Maryland, has been nothing short of despicable. Based on the sensationalism of many of the people in this room, you would think we deported a candidate for Father of the Year. That's because, unfortunately, many in this country care more about this quote-unquote Maryland father, a legal alien MS-13 gang member, than a Maryland mother and an American citizen who was brutally murdered at the hands of a different illegal alien. Of course, I am referring to Rachel Morin. And if you didn't see yesterday, a Maryland jury found illegal alien Victor Antonio Martinez Hernandez guilty of murdering Rachel Morin in August of 2023. She was a 37-year-old mother of 5 who was jogging in an otherwise safe community northeast of Baltimore when this monster ambushed, strangled, and beat her to death before stuffing her brutalized body in a tunnel drain. The Morin family finally got justice yesterday, but they will never get Rachel back. Our hearts go out to Rachel's family, her 5 children, and her mother, Patty, who has suffered the unimaginable loss of her daughter.
So the illegal alien that killed Laken Riley is in prison, and now so is the illegal alien that murdered Rachel Morin in Maryland. Both of Maryland's Democratic senators and most other Democrats, you may recall, voted against the Laken Riley Act. And today you'll hear a lot about Maryland Democratic Senator Chris Van Hollen traveling to El Salvador to work on facilitating the release of the El Salvadorian man who entered the country illegally, who the Trump administration says is an MS-13 gang member and was living in Maryland when deported. Van Hollen released a detailed statement about Rachel Morin when her killer was arrested, but did he ever meet with her family? Did Van Hollen go to Russia and try to facilitate the release of Mark Fogel, who was wrongly imprisoned for 3.5 years, or U.S. Marine Robert Gilman, or Jimmy Wilgus? Did he go to Gaza and try to facilitate the release of any American hostages from Hamas? Did he support Biden's open border policies? You bet your sweet you know what he did. More from Rob Schmitt tonight.
All right, Sebastian Gorka is the senior director for counterterrorism at the White House, and this is a terror subject because these gang members have been labeled as terrorists in this country, and good to have you back, sir. The White House now saying Abrego Garcia is a human trafficker. That's what we learned today from the White House press briefing. And again, a judge ruled 6 years ago that he couldn't be deported from this country because he was a gang member. And that judge had fears that he would be targeted by rival gangs in El Salvador. Doesn't that just solve the question right there in itself?
Well, the question is solved, Rob. Good evening. At so many levels. Number one, this individual is a foreign national who came here illegally. So that's your first 2 strikes. Then we find out he's a member of an organization that we recently designated as a foreign terrorist organization. So 3 strikes and you're out. And it's quite telling that we have Democrats on Capitol Hill, not just the lunatics who are torching Tesla dealerships in acts of terrorism themselves, saying, oh my gosh, the rights of this individual. You mean the terrorist who came here illegally? and that individual who said, I can't go home because one gang that I'm not a member of wants to kill me because I am a member of another gang. Seriously, Rob, if you read this in a fictional novel 10 years ago, you'd say absolutely absurd. This is where we are today. President Trump, Stephen Miller, Kristi Noem, Tom Homan are trying to keep us safe, but the other side of the aisle is on the side of the terrorists.
And just how comical it is that, again, they dumped all of this into this country. Millions and millions of people were dumped into this country intentionally. It was flagrant. It was treasonous. And now you have the same party that did this to us are sitting back and watching as the White House tries to go through this almost impossible process of deporting millions of people. And they're trying to find any problem they can that they can jump on, to vilify the White House as they try to do the almost impossible mandate that was given to them by the American people of how do you figure out how to deport 15 million people that were invited in by the last president?
I came up with this over a year ago when I had my show on Newsmax, Rob, and I realized that the taxonomy of politics in America is dead. It's not left and right. It's not even Republican or Democrat. There's one line that divides us. Do you love America or do you hate America? It's really quite that simple. And we have people who love America, like the president, like his cabinet, like the directors of his agencies, who want to protect Americans. And then there is the other side that is on the side of the cartel members, on the side of the illegal aliens, on the side of the terrorists. And you have to ask yourself, are they technically aiding and abetting them? Because aiding and abetting criminals and terrorists is a crime in federal statute, Rob.
Senior Director of Counterterrorism, Deputy Assistant to the President, and former Newsmax host Sebastian Gorka on Rob Schmitt Tonight. Some of these same people, and let me be very clear when I say that, some of the same lefties, and not Senator Van Hollen, but former Washington Post reporter and Substack writer Taylor Lorenz, are supporting United Healthcare killer Luigi Mangione. This was the topic of discussion on Plante The Right Squad last night, beginning with former White House Director of Strategic Communications, Mercedes Schlapp.
As the mother of 5 girls, I find this appalling. Like, I pray to God that women across this country are not falling for this insanity like what Taylor Lorenz is promoting here, where she's saying that this killer, this cold-blooded killer, basically is morally good. There's nothing morally good of what he did to destroy an innocent man, to destroy his family. And I just find it to be sickening. And I pray to God that girls don't follow in her lead. And let me tell you, I get this crazy mail at my house, and it's Luigi Mangione in the saint-like photos. And it's very disturbing to watch that these girls have this obsession and believe that he's sort of this Messiah-like figure.
There's a death cult, a murder cult living among us. They're our neighbors, and you might be related to him, too. Not to be outdone, the frontman for you may remember the punk rock band, the Circle Jerks. The head guy has spoken out about his support for Luigi Mangione, telling fans, what we do encourage, what would be totally bleeping happening, would be an army of Luigis. He explains that he doesn't support violence, not counting what he just said there, but we'll let you be the judge of that. Now, Jason, when the Circle Jerks, I'm sure one of your favorite, you got the CDs in your front seat, but the Circle Jerks guy coming out and saying, we need an army of Luigis, meaning of murderers who will kill, assassinate, target, and kill CEOs and healthcare executives.
Yeah, I don't know who the Circle Jerks are. I think you took the words right out of my mouth, so I can't even speak to this. I can't even speak to, like, what kind of following he has.
Taylor Lorenz?
I don't even know Taylor Lorenz. That's not somebody that I'm familiar with. But I thought, from what I did see in that segment, that she was talking about a phenomenon that's always been around of women liking men who have been in prison, or men, writing, Ted Bundy because they think he's handsome. Like that's just kind of a phenomenon. Yeah. So I if she was referring to that, and I'd have to see the rest of the context, but that's a real thing. They have a thing called Love After Lockup. Yeah. I've seen it on social media.
I saw the Circle Jerks in 1984. They were actually bad then. But strangely, opening act,
Yeah.
Army of Luigis.
The Army of Luigis.
Who knew?
Hey,
it was a great punk group back then.
Yeah. And Taylor Renz she was gushing personally, not just as a proxy for the other mental cases, but she's an award-winning journalist from the New York Times, the Washington Post.
Chris Plante, host of The Right Squad with Mercedes Schlapp, Democratic strategist Jason Nichols, and others, including occasional guest Matthew Foldy, editor-in-chief of The Washington Reporter, who was selected to be in the new media seat at yesterday's White House press briefing. And he got to ask the first question.
So, Karoline, thanks so much for having me here on behalf of our readership and the millions of Americans who I think appreciate what you're doing with the new media seat here and making this a more accessible briefing room. I'm curious with Harvard. We saw the Trump administration today announce it's cutting around $2 billion, or freezing $2 billion in funds to Harvard because the campus has serious problems with violence and with anti-Semitism. We saw former President Obama, side with Harvard, which rejected the Trump administration's demands. I'm curious, where does the administration see this going with Harvard and with other colleges and universities in America that are refusing to reform in wake of the sort of craziness that we've seen take over some of them?
Thank you, Matt, for being here, and thanks for the question. When it comes to Harvard, the president's position on this is grounded in common sense, in the basic principle that Jewish American students, or students of any faith, should not be illegally harassed and targeted on our nation's college campuses. And we unfortunately saw that illegal discrimination take place on the campus of Harvard. There are countless examples to prove it, particularly with the stunning confession by then Harvard President Claudine Gay, who said that bullying and harassment depended on the context. The president at that time made it clear to the American public he was not going to tolerate illegal harassment and anti-Semitism taking place in violations of federal law. So the president made it clear to Harvard, follow federal law, no longer break Title VI, which was passed by Congress to ensure no student can be discriminated against on the basis of race, and you will receive federal funding. Unfortunately, Harvard has not taken the president or the administration's demands seriously. All the president is asking, don't break federal law, and then you can have your federal funding. I think the president is also begging a good question. More than $2 billion out the door to Harvard when they have a more than $50 billion endowment. Why are the American taxpayers subsidizing a university that has billions of dollars in the bank already? And we certainly should not be funding a place where such grave anti-Semitism exists.
On yesterday's Newsmax Daily, I read the post on X from Harvard's president. I told you President Obama had retweeted it with a comment of support for Harvard. I believe I read Obama's comment as well, basically encouraging other schools to do the same. Well, showing support for Harvard and essentially encouraging other schools to do the same, to defy the Trump administration. Greta Van Susteren spoke about it with Education Secretary Linda McMahon, who I like more and more every day.
United States Secretary of Education Linda McMahon joins me. Nice to see you, Madam Secretary.
Greta, nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Okay, before we get to this issue with Harvard, this is the thing that I've always wondered. Harvard, I looked it up again today, has $53 billion in endowment. What are they getting $2 billion from the federal government to get in the first place?
Well, it's a lot more than $2 billion. I can tell you that right now there's about $9 billion that's actually been pledged through grants to Harvard. But at this particular point, I think it's about $2 billion that's been held up while we go through this process with Harvard. So there's a lot of money that goes to these universities. And one of the things the president has said, look, these universities aren't abiding by what we think are the right things to do. And it's really what set us about the investigations were really about civil rights. It was anti-Semitism on campus. It was student safety. It wasn't about, a lot of the other things. But that was the key.
But I'm for research and science. I'd like to cure cancer, although that moonshot that we were promised didn't happen. The moonshot at MD Anderson with former President Biden. But it's a lot of money.
It is a lot of money.
What's the rest of the country getting when all this money, $2 billion plus that you say that Harvard's been getting? What do I get out of it? What do people I grew up with in Appleton, Wisconsin get out of that?
So let me just put it a little bit in perspective for you. The total amount to a lot of these universities is about $50 to $60 billion in grants today. So a lot of what we do get out of universities is a lot of the research that they do. They do some very critical research. DOD uses them, HHS HHS uses them for a lot of their clinical research, et cetera. So a lot of good work comes out of that research. But your question is valid. Why aren't they funding a lot of the research out of their endowments? And it's one of the questions that the president has asked. Why should taxpayer dollars be going to do that?
Well, I'm all in favor of a lot of things that you identify, but are there some sort of, I don't want to say dopey, but some things that perhaps are not so critical to operating our country that these grants are going to?
I'm sorry?
Are there things that are not so critical? I mean, are things going to, I mean, not to criticize letters and science, but aren't these grants going to non-science?
Yeah, a lot of the grants do go to non-science things. That's right. But primarily the grants that we've been looking at for these universities, and the biggest amounts that have been held up have been from HHS, and a lot of that funding is through NIH.
Well, see, I mean, that concerns me more because I do want research in those areas. All right. Harvard's not going to be hurting any by freezing this, right?
No. It definitely is not. I mean, they do have money to operate, that is for sure. But we'd like to continue negotiations with Harvard. I mean, we sat with them. I sent them a letter. I spoke to the president of Harvard. He had called after Columbia. And so we had what I thought was a good conversation. And then it was pretty hard line. They didn't come back to negotiate at all. So we took the line of freezing the funds, and it's why we review.
Are public universities getting money like this?
No.
Just, what do you mean, no? I mean, they're not? I mean, you know, where I went to college, they're doing a lot of interesting research, a lot of interesting stuff. The University of Wisconsin, they do a lot of science.
I don't mean that they don't get, you know, funding and that sort of thing. And I'm, you know, really looking more right now at the elite universities, because I think they are the ones who, you know, the country looks at the most, and it's elite universities who have just kind of, I mean, think about this. When you have the president of one of these elite universities sitting before Congress, and they can't decide whether or not they can condemn genocide, I mean, those are the things that really turn off, you know, the people in the country. And then we see all of this anti-Semitic behavior, kids locked up, you know, in libraries, and other students banging on the glass and saying death to Israel, death to USA. I mean, the country is thinking about its tax dollars going there and would rather see them spent differently.
Yeah, no kidding. None of us want to pay for it, right? Education Secretary Linda McMahon on the record with Greta Van Susteren. That is 6 p.m. Eastern on Newsmax. The total for mainly elite universities, she said, which also doesn't make any sense. Elite universities that have massive endowments and get massive individual donations get more money from the government than public universities. How does that make sense? For what it's worth, Mr. President, and I mean President Trump, the Trump administration, Secretary McMahon, and Elon, this is what we do, okay? We cut funding to all private universities by 10%. Anyone can live with a 10% cut, especially if you have billions in the coffer. That would be about $5 to $6 billion, according to Secretary McMahon. We take that $5 or $6 billion, we put it into Social Security or Medicare. Boom. There you go. Some of the problem easily solved. Yeah, Marino for Congress. By the way, speaking of Social Security, President Trump signed an executive order Tuesday to ensure that only U.S. citizens receive Social Security. Bianca De La Garza spoke about the Harvard situation and President Obama with constitutional law expert Alan Dershowitz, who has been on the Harvard University faculty for 50 years.
Specifically when it comes to Obama, the former president calls this an unlawful attempt. But if you go back in history, he sued, and the federal government sued Hillsdale College, which doesn't take any federal dollars, to force them into Title IX compliance, arguing being tax exempt means you're subject to federal control. So you can't have it both ways. And obviously, him coming to the defense here of Harvard, many say this is part of the issue. It is Marxism. It is steeped in, and it's been decades in the making, and now it is festering. We all see it clearly with our own eyes, but this is something that, sadly, Harvard is continuing to perpetuate. What would you say to the president? What would you say to alums who are still making donations to that $53 billion endowment, Professor Dershowitz?
I can tell you I know many alums, including people I know very closely and faculty members like me, who won't give a penny to Harvard until they change their attitudes. Look, Obama is part of the problem. Sanders is part of the problem. They love the fact that Harvard has become ideologically left, that 95% of the faculty are Democrats, and that students feel very inhibited about speaking in class if they're conservatives, if they're Christians, if they're Jewish, if they're Zionists. Harvard has become a place where one-sided ideology dominates. That doesn't mean that the Trump administration is correct in cutting off research grants for the cure of cancer or Alzheimer's. The targeting has to be selective. And, Harvard is sending double message. On the one hand, its president, who I know and admire and I like, wrote a very strong letter designed to get the faculty behind him, because the faculty is very left and very anti-Trump. On the other hand, they hired as their two lawyers to represent them in their dispute with the Trump administration, two very, very Trump affiliated lawyers. And so they're sending a message to the Trump administration: don't necessarily listen to what we're saying to our faculty, listen to our lawyers. And I'm sure there'll be negotiations. I've read the letter very carefully that Harvard sent to that the government sent to Harvard. And many of the things in the demand of the government are good, are right. Harvard ought to do it. They ought to do it on their own. Some go too far. And that's why we have negotiations. Trump's a negotiator. And now we know by who Harvard hired to be their lawyers, they're also negotiators. And so in the end, we will see hopefully a negotiation. Otherwise, I don't want to see the losers be research on cancer and other kinds of research that are funded by the federal government. We need a resolution here, and I think a resolution is possible. But Harvard has to be willing to make changes, because the current status quo is just not fair to conservative students, to Jewish students, to many American patriotic students, to Zionist students. It's just not fair. And people feel that they're not safe, intellectually safe, emotionally safe, even physically safe.
Harvard professor Alan Dershowitz, and listen to this. This really sums it up perfectly. This should make anybody understand.
I want everybody to imagine it's the 1950s. The Supreme Court has just ended segregation, and the University of Mississippi is harassing black students, not allowing them to come to class, making life miserable for them, teaching white supremacy in the classroom. And the federal government comes in and says, unless you change your ways and start teaching fairly and start treating black students equally, we're going to cut off federal funding. Every liberal in the world would be applauding that decision. Every liberal, every civil liberties group, every Democrat, every leftist would say, wow, isn't that the right way to go? To stop teaching racism, to stop harassing black students. But today the shoe is on the other foot, and the students who are being harassed are Jewish students. And what is being taught is anti-American, anti-Christian, anti-Jewish, ideological values in many of the classrooms. And so we see hypocrisy. Everybody claiming free speech, academic freedom. They wouldn't be claiming it if the shoe were on the other foot.
Perfect analogy, right? Harvard law professor Alan Dershowitz on Newsmax with Bianca De La Garza. At the White House, President Trump is participating in an Easter service and dinner later today. Karoline Leavitt mentioned yesterday that the president and first lady will also continue the Easter egg roll tradition at the White House on Monday. On Wall Street, stocks opened lower even after a very positive retail sales number showing that sales increased 1.4% in March, higher than the 1.2% forecast by analysts and much higher than the 0.2% in February. February is traditionally a low month for retail sales because of weather, and, it's after Christmas. There's a lot of talk today about NVIDIA shares dropping due to a $5 billion charge that the company released related to chip exports to China, the massive tariffs that China is now putting on the U.S. Aside from the tariff talk and retail sales numbers, Wall Street is also waiting to see what Fed Chairman Jerome the Prophet Killer Powell says when he speaks at the Economic Club of Chicago today. The head of the Cleveland Federal Reserve is also making some comments about the economy. So we'll keep a close eye on things. We've talked in the past about billionaire lefty George Soros essentially taking control of a company called Odyssey Broadcasting, the owner of some of the largest conservative news talk radio stations in the country. If you didn't hear me talk about it, you most likely have read about it or heard it on other shows. Well, Donald Trump Jr., a broadcaster himself, and Laura Trump, also now a broadcaster, Eric's wife, Laura Trump, have invested substantially in conservative radio company Salem Communications. That is really interesting. Bitcoin and most other cryptocurrencies slightly lower as well this morning at the time of recording. Bitcoin at 86,640. Be sure to keep up with all of the news throughout the day on Newsmax, N2, and at Newsmax.com. Make sure you're streaming on Newsmax Plus as well so you get to see all of your favorite shows and hosts throughout the day with plenty of expert analysis. It all starts each and every day with Wake Up America, followed by National Report, Bianca De La Garza, Carl Higbee, Greta Van Susteren, Rob Schmitt Tonight, Finnerty, Greg Kelly Reports, and much, much more. I'm Tony Marino. Thank you so much for listening. Enjoy your day, pay attention, and keep on fighting the good fight.
News breaks every minute, every day. You need the app, the Newsmax app. Find it free on your smartphone store. Then watch us anytime, anywhere.
Information. Truth. Is freedom. Is Newsmax. It's real news for real people.